The courtroom was full, but no one laughed. Not when the defendant smirked, not when the judge looked up. That's when everyone realized this wasn't funny anymore. I remember the exact second the air changed. The defendant had just whispered something to his attorney, and three people in the gallery behind him started giggling. Not loud, just enough that I heard it. The prosecutor's head snapped toward them. The court reporter's fingers stopped mid-keystroke, and I set my pen down slowly, looked up, and waited. The defendant was still grinning when our eyes met. That grin disappeared. This was a civil contempt hearing, which sounds minor until you understand what brought us here. The man standing in front of me had been ordered 6 months earlier to turn over financial documents in a fraud investigation. He didn't. Then he was ordered again. He didn't. Then he was fined. He paid the fine with a check that had a smiley face drawn in the memo line. That's when the plaintiff's attorney filed for contempt, and that's when he ended up in my courtroom. His name was Richard Dannon, mid-40s, owned a chain of car washes that were doing well enough for him to afford a lawyer who wore cufflinks. He'd treated every prior hearing like a performance, laughing at questions, making jokes to the gallery, playing to an audience that didn't exist. His attorney had tried to rein him in, but you can't control a client who thinks the system is a game. The plaintiff was a former business partner named Alan Greaves. Quiet man, thin, the kind of person who doesn't take up much space in a room. He claimed Dannon had forced him out of the business and cooked the books to make it look like Greaves was never owed anything. The documents Dannon refused to produce were the only way to prove it. I'd read the filings. Greaves had lost his house. His wife had left him. He was working 2 jobs just to stay afloat while Dannon bought a vacation property in Scottsdale. When I called the hearing to order that morning, Dannon walked in like he was attending a barbecue, hands in his pockets, smiled at the bailiff, waved to someone in the gallery. His attorney, a man named Howell, looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. The plaintiff's attorney stood first. Her name was Brennan. She was short, wore glasses that kept sliding down her nose, and had a voice that could cut glass when she wanted it to. Your Honor, Mr. Dannon has been in willful violation of 3 separate court orders. He has shown a pattern of obstruction, bad faith, and outright disrespect for this court's authority. We are asking that you hold him in contempt and order him to produce the documents immediately or face incarceration until compliance. I looked at Dannon. He shrugged. Howell stood quickly. Your Honor, my client has experienced some logistical difficulties in gathering the requested materials. We are asking for an extension of 30 days to ensure everything is provided in full. Brennan didn't sit down. Your Honor, this is the 4th extension request. Mr. Dannon has had over 6 months. He's not experiencing difficulties. He's stalling. I turned to Dannon. Mr. Dannon, do you have the documents with you today? He smiled. Looked at Howell, looked back at me. Not exactly, Your Honor. What does that mean? Well, some of them might have gotten lost. Filing systems, you know. Hard to keep track of everything when you're running a business. Someone in the gallery laughed. I didn't. Mr. Dannon, I'm going to ask you one more time. Do you have access to the financial records that were ordered produced in this case? He leaned back, hands still in his pockets. I mean, probably. Somewhere. Howell closed his eyes. I let the silence sit there for a moment. Dannon shifted his weight. The grin faded just a little. Mr. Howell approached the bench. Howell walked up. Brennan followed. I leaned forward and kept my voice low. Mr. Howell, I've given your client every opportunity to comply. He's chosen not to. If you have any way to convince him that this is not a joke, now is the time. Howell nodded. His face was red. I understand, Your Honor, I'll speak with him. You have 2 minutes. They stepped back. Howell leaned down and whispered something to Dannon. I couldn't hear it, but I saw Dannon's expression change, just for a second. Then he waved Howell off and sat back in his chair like nothing had happened. When they returned to their positions, I addressed the room. Mr. Dannon, this court has been more than patient. You've been given clear orders. You've been given time. You've been given warnings. You've ignored all of them. This is your last chance to comply voluntarily. "Do you have the documents or not?" He looked at me. The smirk was back. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I don't think those documents are really that important. This whole thing is just Mr. Greaves being bitter because—" "Stop." He stopped. "I didn't ask for your opinion. I asked if you have the documents." He shrugged again. "Not on me, no." I picked up my gavel. Didn't use it yet, just held it. "Then I'm finding you in civil contempt. You are ordered to produce all financial records within 72 hours or you will be held in custody until you comply. Do you understand?" The room went quiet. Dannon blinked. Looked at Howell. Howell didn't look back. "Wait, what? You heard me. 72 hours. You can't be serious." "I am." He stood up. "This is insane. You're going to jail me over some paperwork." "No, Mr. Dannon. You're going to jail yourself if you choose not to comply. The power to avoid incarceration is entirely in your hands. You just have to follow the order." He laughed. It was sharp and bitter, and it didn't sound like he thought anything was funny anymore. "This is unbelievable." I set the gavel down. 72 hours. Next hearing is Friday at 9. If the documents are not provided by then, you will be remanded into custody. We're adjourned. I stood. The bailiff called for everyone to rise. Dannon just stood there, staring at me like I'd said something in a language he didn't understand. His attorney grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the door. The gallery was silent as they left. Brennan stayed behind to file paperwork. Greaves sat in the back row, hands folded in his lap. He didn't say anything. He just nodded once and walked out. Friday came. Dannon showed up, but he didn't have the documents. He had excuses. His accountant was out of town. The files were in storage. He needed more time. His attorney tried to spin it as a good faith effort, but I'd seen enough. I remanded him into custody. The bailiff walked over. Dannon looked at Howell like he was supposed to do something. Howell just stood there with his briefcase in his hand, looking at the floor. Dannon's voice cracked when he spoke. "This is ridiculous. You can't do this." I looked at him. "I just did." They put him in handcuffs. He didn't resist, but his whole body went stiff. The bailiff led him out through the side door. The gallery was still full, but no one said a word. No one laughed. Greaves sat in the same spot. He watched Dannon leave. Then he stood up and walked out without looking back. Dannon produced the documents 4 days later. I reviewed them in chambers before the next hearing. They showed exactly what Greaves had claimed. Falsified entries, redirected funds, a systematic effort to cut Greaves out and cover it up. The case settled 2 weeks after that. Greaves got his share plus damages. Dannon's attorney filed a motion to reconsider the contempt finding. I denied it. I saw Dannon one more time after that. He was leaving the courthouse while I was walking in from the parking garage. He didn't say anything, just looked at me and kept walking. He looked older, tired. I don't know what happened to him after the settlement. I don't follow up on cases once they're done. But I remember that moment in the courtroom when the room went quiet, when everyone realized this wasn't a game anymore. That's the moment I think about when people ask me what it's like to be a judge. You don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to explain yourself. You just have to mean it. And they have to know you mean it. I thought that was the end of it. Turns out it wasn't. 3 months later, I was in chambers going through a stack of motions when my clerk knocked on the door. She had that look on her face, the one that means someone's about to make my day more complicated. "Judge, there's a situation." I looked up. "What kind of situation?" "Richard Dannon is in the building. He's asking to speak with you." I set down my pen. "Is he represented?" "No attorney with him. He's alone. Says it's urgent." I've been doing this long enough to know that when a former litigant shows up unannounced asking to speak directly to the judge, it's never good. But I also knew that if I refused to see him, he'd file some motion claiming I was biased or denied him access. Better to handle it now. Have the bailiff bring him to the conference room. I'll meet him there. 5 minutes later, I walked into the small conference room down the hall from my chambers. Dannon was sitting at the table. No handcuffs this time, no smirk either. He looked thinner. His shirt was wrinkled. There were dark circles under his eyes. The bailiff stood by the door. I stayed standing. "Mr. Dannon, you know you're not supposed to contact me directly. If you have a legal matter, you need to go through the proper channels." He nodded, looked down at his hands. "I know, I didn't know where else to go. That's not my problem. I need to tell you something." I crossed my arms. "If this is about your case, it's settled. There's nothing to discuss." "It's not about the case." I waited. He took a breath. His hands were shaking. "After you held me in contempt after I got out, things changed. People found out. Word got around. I lost 3 contracts. My wife filed for divorce. My business partners pushed me out." He looked up at me. "I lost everything." I didn't react. "Mr. Dannon, those are consequences of your own actions. Not mine." "I know." His voice was quiet. "That's why I'm here." I glanced at the bailiff. He was watching Dannon carefully. "You were right," Dannon said. "About all of it. I thought I don't know. I thought if I stalled long enough, Greaves would give up. I thought the system would let me slide. I thought it was all just a formality. It wasn't." "No," he shook his head. "It wasn't." There was a long silence. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking. "So why are you here?" I asked. He looked at me. His eyes were red. "Because I need to know if you knew. When you sent me to jail, did you know it would destroy my life?" I felt my jaw tighten. This was exactly the kind of conversation I'm not supposed to have. But he'd asked the question, and he was sitting there waiting for an answer. "Mr. Dannon, I didn't send you to jail. You sent yourself. I gave you multiple opportunities to comply. You chose not to. What happened after that was a direct result of your choices, not my ruling." "But you knew," he said. "You had to know what would happen." I took a step closer to the table. "What I knew was that a man who'd been wronged deserved justice. What I knew was that you had information that could prove his case, and you were hiding it because it benefited you. What I knew was that if I let you walk out of that courtroom without consequences, it would tell every other person in this county that court orders are optional. So yes, I knew. I knew exactly what I was doing." He stared at me. His hand stopped shaking. "And I'd do it again," I said. The silence that followed was different, heavier. He wasn't looking for sympathy anymore. He was looking for something else. Permission, maybe, or closure. "Greaves got his money," Dannon said quietly. "Did you know that?" "I knew the case settled. He paid off his debts, got a small apartment. Last I heard, he's working at a hardware store." Dannon's voice cracked. "I had 6 car washes, a house, a family, and now I'm sleeping on my brother's couch." I didn't say anything. "Do you think that's fair?" he asked. I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. The bailiff shifted but didn't move closer. "Fair?" I repeated. "You want to talk about fair? Alan Greaves worked beside you for 8 years. He helped you build those car washes. And when the business took off, you erased him. You falsified records. You stole his share. You forced him into poverty while you bought vacation homes. So don't come into this room and ask me about fair." Dannon's face went pale. "You lost your business," I continued. "You lost your marriage. You lost your reputation. And you know what Alan Greaves lost? Years of his life, his home, his marriage too. The only difference is he didn't have a choice. You did." Dannon looked away. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles working. "I didn't come here for a lecture," he said. "Then why did you come?" He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I wanted you to know that I understand now. What you did. Why you did it." He looked back at me. "I wanted to tell you that you were right." I studied his face. There was no smirk, no performance, just exhaustion. "Mr. Dannon, I don't need you to tell me I was right. I need you to understand that actions have consequences. And when you ignore that long enough, those consequences catch up." He nodded slowly, stood up. The bailiff straightened. "Thank you for seeing me," Dannon said. I stood as well. "If you have any further legal matters, go through the clerk's office. Don't come to my chambers again." "I won't." He walked to the door. The bailiff opened it. Dannon paused in the doorway and looked back at me one more time. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm sorry." Then he left. I stood there for a moment after he was gone. The room felt smaller. I walked back to my chambers, sat down at my desk, and stared at the stack of motions waiting for me. My clerk knocked again an hour later. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Fine," I said, but I kept thinking about what Dannon had said, about whether I'd known what would happen when I held him in contempt. The truth was I had known. Maybe not the specifics, but I knew that defying a court order publicly would have consequences beyond the four walls of that courtroom. And I'd done it anyway, because that's the job. You make the call, you enforce the rules, and you live with what comes after. I never saw Richard Dannon again. I heard through the courthouse grapevine that he moved out of state, started over somewhere else. I don't know if that's true. What I do know is that every time I walk into a courtroom now, I remember that morning when the room went quiet, when everyone stopped laughing, when they realized that the law isn't a suggestion, it's a line, and when you cross it, someone has to enforce it. That someone was me, still is. 6 months after Dannon walked out of that conference room, I got a letter. It came through the clerk's office, flagged and logged like everything else that crosses my desk. Plain envelope, no return address, just my name and the courthouse. My clerk handed it to me with the morning docket and didn't say anything, but I saw her glance at it twice. I opened it in chambers after my first hearing. Inside was a single handwritten page. The handwriting was shaky, like it had been written in a moving car or by someone whose hands weren't steady. It was from Alan Greaves. "Your Honor," it started, "I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to reach out because I heard something recently that I thought you should know. Richard Dannon came to see me last week." I stopped reading, set the letter down, looked at the clock on my wall, then I picked it back up. "He showed up at the hardware store where I work. I didn't recognize him at first. He looked different, older. He waited until my shift ended and then approached me in the parking lot. I'll be honest, I thought about walking away. But something in his face made me stop. He apologized, not the way people do when they're trying to get something. He just said he was sorry for what he did, for the years I lost, for the lies. He said he didn't expect me to forgive him, but he needed to say it out loud. I didn't know what to say, so I just stood there. And then he told me something I didn't expect. He said that when you held him in contempt, when you sent him to jail, it was the first time in his life someone had forced him to face what he'd done. He said he'd spent his whole life thinking he could talk his way out of anything. That rules were for other people. He said you changed that. I'm writing to you because I wanted you to know that what you did mattered, not just for me, for him too. I don't know if he'll ever rebuild his life, but at least now he knows what he took from me, and that means something. Thank you, Alan Greaves." I read it twice. Then I folded it and put it in my desk drawer. I didn't respond. You're not supposed to, but I kept it. That afternoon, I had a motion hearing for a custody dispute, then a sentencing, then a pretrial conference that ran long because the attorneys couldn't agree on jury instructions. Normal day. Normal cases. I went through them the same way I always do, listening, ruling, moving forward. But Greaves' letter sat in the back of my mind. When I got home that night, my wife asked me how my day was. I told her it was fine. She knows better than to push, so she didn't. We ate dinner, watched some television, went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Dannon standing in that conference room, asking me if I knew what would happen to him. I kept thinking about Greaves in that parking lot, hearing an apology he probably never thought he'd get. And I kept thinking about what I'd said to Dannon, that I'd do it again. I meant it. The next morning I had another full docket. Third case up was a civil matter, breach of contract. Small business owner claiming a supplier had shorted him on materials and refused to make it right. The supplier's attorney was smooth, expensive suit, talked in circles, kept trying to delay discovery. The business owner represented himself, brought a banker's box full of invoices and emails, spoke quietly, didn't make eye contact with the supplier. I'd seen this story before. When the supplier's attorney asked for a continuance to gather additional documentation, I looked at him for a long moment. "How long have you had to gather this documentation?" I asked. "Your Honor, we've been dealing with some internal reorganization, and that's not what I asked." "How long?" He hesitated. 3 months, Your Honor. I turned to the business owner. "Do you have the materials you need to proceed?" He nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, everything's right here." I looked back at the attorney. "Motion for continuance is denied. We're proceeding today. You have 15 minutes to review the plaintiff's evidence and then we're moving forward." The attorney opened his mouth, closed it, looked at his client. The supplier was whispering something urgent, but I couldn't hear it. 15 minutes, I said again. Use them wisely. They settled during the recess. The business owner got his materials and compensation for the delays. The supplier's attorney looked furious, but he shook hands and walked out. The business owner stayed behind, gathering his invoices back into the box. He glanced up at me before he left, didn't say anything, just nodded. I nodded back. That's when I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. What happened with Dannon wasn't just about one case, it was about every case. Every time someone walks into a courtroom thinking the system won't touch them. Every time someone with money or power or a good attorney assumes they can outlast, outwait, or outsmart the process. My job isn't to make people's lives difficult, it's to make the system mean something. And sometimes that requires consequences that feel harsh. Sometimes it requires sending someone to jail over documents. Sometimes it requires denying a continuance that might seem reasonable on the surface. Because the alternative is a system where Alan Greaves works 2 jobs while Richard Dannon buys vacation homes. Where people who follow the rules get crushed by people who don't. I can't fix everything. I can't undo the years Greaves lost. I can't give Dannon back his marriage or his business. But I can make sure that when someone stands in my courtroom and chooses to defy an order, they understand that choice has weight. A few weeks later, I was leaving the courthouse at the end of a long day. It was nearly 7. The building was mostly empty. I was walking through the lobby when I saw someone sitting on one of the benches near the entrance. It was Dannon. I stopped. He saw me and stood up. "I'm not here to bother you," he said quickly. I wanted you to see something." He reached into his jacket. The security guard by the door tensed. Dannon noticed and moved slowly, pulling out a folded piece of paper. "I got a job," he said. "It's not much, but it's honest work." He held out the paper. I didn't take it. "Mr. Dannon, I'm glad you're working, but you need to understand that I can't have these conversations with you. I know. I just needed you to see that I'm trying." I looked at him. Really looked at him. He'd gained back some weight, his clothes were clean, his eyes were clearer. "Then keep trying," I said, "but don't come here again." He nodded, folded the paper back up and put it away. "Thank you, Your Honor." He walked past me toward the exit. I watched him push through the doors and disappear into the parking lot. The security guard looked at me. "You okay, Judge?" "Yeah," I said, "I'm fine." But I stood there for another minute looking at those doors. I thought about Greaves' letter, about that business owner with his box of invoices, about every person who walks into a courtroom hoping someone will listen. That's what keeps me in this chair. Not the power, not the authority. The fact that sometimes, not always but sometimes, the system works. And when it does, it changes things. Maybe not the way you expect, maybe not the way that feels comfortable, but it changes things. I walked out to my car, drove home. My wife was already asleep. I stood in the kitchen for a while, drinking a glass of water, thinking about nothing in particular. Then I went to bed. Tomorrow there would be more cases, more people looking for justice, more attorneys playing games, more decisions to make. And I'd make them the same way I always do, one at a time, with the full weight of what they mean, because that's the job. 2 years went by. I didn't think about Richard Dannon much during that time. Cases came and went. I presided over trials, hearings, settlements. Some people walked out of my courtroom satisfied. Others didn't. That's how it goes. Then one morning, I was reviewing a motion for a fraud case when my clerk came in with a message slip. She set it on my desk without saying anything and left. I picked it up. It was from a detective with the county sheriff's office. He needed to speak with me about a matter involving a former case. The name attached was Richard Dannon. I called him back during lunch. "Judge, thanks for getting back to me." the detective said. His voice was rough, like he'd been talking all day. "I'm working a case and your name came up in some documentation. I wanted to ask you a few questions." "What kind of case?" "Fraud investigation. Business loan scheme. We've got several victims and one of the people who reported it was Richard Dannon." I set down my sandwich. "Dannon reported fraud?" "Yes, sir. About 8 months ago. He came forward with information about a group running fake business loans. They'd been targeting people who were desperate, folks who couldn't get traditional financing. Promised them capital, took their upfront fees, then disappeared. Dannon was one of their marks." I leaned back in my chair. "How much did he lose?" "12,000. It was everything he'd saved trying to start over." The detective paused. "But here's the thing. He didn't just report his own case. He gave us names, records. He'd been documenting everything because he suspected something was off. His information led us to 14 other victims and helped us build the case. We arrested 3 people last month." I didn't say anything for a moment. "Judge, the reason I'm calling is because during the investigation, Dannon mentioned you. Said you taught him what accountability looked like. Said if he hadn't learned that lesson, he would have just written off the loss and moved on. But instead, he reported it because he knew what it felt like to be on the other side." "I see. I thought you'd want to know." "His testimony is going to be key in the prosecution. He's not asking for anything, not trying to get credit. He just showed up and did the right thing." I thanked the detective and hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at the motion on my desk without reading it. 3 weeks later, I was in court for a routine docket call when I noticed someone sitting in the back row of the gallery. He was wearing a jacket and tie and he sat with his hands folded, not talking to anyone. It was Dannon. I didn't acknowledge him during the proceedings. Went through the calendar, set hearing dates, handled motions. When we broke for lunch, I saw him stand up and walk toward the exit. "Mr. Dannon," I said. He stopped, turned around. "Your Honor." A word in chambers. He followed me down the hallway. The bailiff came with us. When we got to my office, I gestured to the chair across from my desk. He sat down. The bailiff stood by the door. "I spoke with a detective a few weeks ago," I said, "about a fraud case." Dannon nodded. "I figured he might reach out to you. Why were you in my courtroom today?" He looked down at his hands. "I wanted to see it again. The courtroom, where it all changed." He looked up at me. "I know I'm not supposed to contact you. I wasn't planning to. I needed to sit there for a minute." "Why?" He took a breath. "Because I'm testifying next week, at the trial, and I'm scared." I waited. "These guys threatened me," he continued, "after I reported them. Nothing physical, but they made it clear they know where I work, where my brother lives. And I keep thinking about backing out, about just letting it go." He shook his head. "But then I remember sitting in this building, in handcuffs, realizing that for the first time in my life, I couldn't talk my way out. I couldn't charm or delay or deflect. I had to face what I'd done. And I figured if I could survive that, I could survive this." I leaned forward. "Mr. Dannon, I can't give you legal advice. I can't tell you what to do, but I will tell you this. If you have information that can stop these people from hurting others and you choose to stay silent, you're making the same choice you made with Alan Greaves. You're choosing yourself over what's right." He nodded slowly. "I know. So what are you going to do?" He stood up. "I'm going to testify." "Then do it. And don't come to my chambers again." He smiled slightly. It wasn't the smirk from years ago. It was something quieter. "Yes, Your Honor." He left. I didn't follow the trial. I didn't look up news articles or check court records. That wasn't my case and it wasn't my place. But about a month later, I got another letter. This time it was from the prosecutor's office. A thank you note from the assistant district attorney who'd handled the fraud case. She wrote that they'd secured convictions on all counts and that Dannon's testimony had been crucial. She mentioned that he'd remained calm under cross-examination, hadn't wavered, and had helped the jury understand the scope of the scheme. At the bottom of the letter, she'd added a handwritten note. "He told me you changed his life. I thought you should know he's changing others now too." I filed the letter away with the one from Greaves. That evening, I had dinner with my wife. She asked me if anything interesting happened that day. I told her about a motion hearing that had gone sideways, about an attorney who'd shown up late, about the usual chaos. I didn't mention Dannon. But later that night, I was sitting in my study, looking at the bookshelf where I keep the case reporters and legal treatises I've accumulated over the years. And I thought about something my father told me when I first became a judge. He said, "You'll make 1,000 decisions. Most of them won't matter a week later, but some of them will echo for years in ways you'll never see. Your job is to make every decision like it might be one of those." I'd held Dannon in contempt because it was the right call in that moment, because the law required it, because Alan Greaves deserved justice. But I never expected it to ripple out like this, to turn a man who'd gamed the system into someone who'd stand up against it being gamed by others. I don't take credit for that. Dannon made his own choices. He did the work. He changed, but maybe, just maybe, I gave him a reason to start. The next morning, I walked into the courthouse the same way I always do, through the security checkpoint, up the elevator, down the hallway to my chambers. I put on my robe and reviewed my docket. First case was a civil dispute, property line disagreement between neighbors. They'd been fighting for 3 years. Their attorneys had billed them into oblivion, and neither side would budge. I called them into court, listened to both sides. Then I looked at them and said, "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to settle this today, or I'm going to rule from the bench and neither of you will like the outcome. You have 1 hour to work it out." They settled in 45 minutes. Sometimes people need permission to stop fighting. Sometimes they need someone to tell them the fight isn't worth it. And sometimes they need someone to tell them the fight is the only thing that matters. My job is knowing which is which. I went home that night and found my wife in the kitchen making dinner. She looked up when I came in. "Long day?" "Not really," I said, "just a normal one," she smiled. "Those are the best kind." I kissed her on the cheek and went to change out of my suit. She was right. Normal days are the best kind. Because normal means the system is working. It means people are coming to court, presenting their cases and getting decisions. It means the machinery of justice is turning the way it's supposed to. But every once in a while, a case comes along that reminds you why the system exists in the first place. Not for the lawyers, not for the judges, not even for the winners, for the people who need someone to stand between them and chaos. That's what I did for Alan Greaves. And in a strange way, that's what I did for Richard Dannon too. I didn't save him. I didn't rehabilitate him. I just held the line, and he decided which side of it he wanted to be on. 4 years passed. I was sitting in a conference with 3 other judges discussing procedural updates when my phone buzzed. I glanced at it under the table. Text from my clerk, "Call when you can." "It's about Dannon." I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. She answered on the first ring. "Judge, I just got a call from a woman named Lisa Dannon. She says she's Richard Dannon's ex-wife. She's asking if there's any way to speak with you." I felt something tighten in my chest. "Did she say why?" "She said it's important, personal." She sounded upset. I looked at my watch. "Tell her I can give her 10 minutes at 4:30. In the conference room, not my chambers, and the bailiff stays in the room." "Understood." At 4:30, I walked into the conference room. Lisa Dannon was already there, sitting with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup. She looked to be in her early 50s, dark hair pulled back, tired eyes. She stood when I entered. "Mrs. Dannon, it's Lisa." I went back to my maiden name, Cooper. I sat down across from her. The bailiff took his position by the door. "My clerk said you needed to speak with me." She nodded, set down the coffee cup. Her hands were shaking slightly. "I wasn't sure if I should come, but I didn't know who else would understand." "Understand what?" She took a breath. "Richard died 3 weeks ago." The room went quiet. I kept my expression neutral, but something shifted inside me. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Don't be." Her voice was flat. "We hadn't spoken in 2 years. Not since the divorce was finalized." She paused. "But his brother called me after they found him, and he told me something I thought you should know." I waited. "Richard had a heart attack. He was at work. He'd been managing a small auto repair shop for the past year. They said it was quick. She looked down at her hands. When his brother went through his apartment to settle his affairs, he found a box. It had documents from the old case, letters, court orders, and a journal. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook, set it on the table between us. His brother read some of it. Then he called me. He thought I'd want to see it, but I told him I didn't. I couldn't. She pushed the notebook toward me. But I thought you might. I looked at the notebook but didn't touch it. Mrs. Cooper, I appreciate you coming here, but I don't think it's appropriate for me to. He wrote about you. Her voice cut through. A lot. About what happened in your courtroom. About how it changed him. She met my eyes. Please, his brother and I both agreed. If anyone should see this, it's you. I hesitated. Then I picked up the notebook. It was worn. The cover was bent at the corners. I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was the same shaky script from the letter I'd seen years ago. The first entry was dated 3 days after I'd held him in contempt. Day 3, still in custody. I keep thinking this is a mistake, that someone will realize they can't actually do this to me. But nobody's coming. Howell visited yesterday and told me to produce the documents, said the judge won't back down. I told him the judge doesn't understand. He said the judge understands perfectly. I think he's right. I think that's what scares me. I turned the page. Day 7. I gave them the documents this morning. Not because I wanted to, because I couldn't take another night in here. The walls don't move. The clock doesn't speed up. You just sit there with yourself. And I realized something. I've been running from myself for 20 years, building businesses, making deals, keeping busy, anything to avoid sitting still. But in here you can't run. You just sit and think and face what you've done. I kept reading, entry after entry. Some were short, some went on for pages. He wrote about losing his business, his marriage, his reputation. He wrote about seeing Alan Greaves in that parking lot and not knowing how to apologize for something that big. Then I found an entry from about 2 years ago. I testified today. The fraud trial. I thought I'd fall apart on the stand, but I didn't. The defense attorney tried to make me look like a criminal, brought up my contempt charge, the embezzlement case, everything. And I just sat there and took it, because it was all true. I did those things. But I also reported these guys when I could have stayed quiet, and I realized something sitting there. The judge didn't punish me to be cruel. He punished me because I needed to understand that actions matter, that you can't just move through the world taking what you want and expecting no consequences. I hated him for a long time. But today, sitting in that courtroom telling the truth even though it hurt, I finally understood what he was trying to teach me. I closed the notebook. Looked at Lisa. She was watching me carefully. There's more, she said quietly. Toward the end, after he got the job at the repair shop, he wrote about trying to be different, about showing up on time, about being honest with customers even when it cost him money, about small things that he said felt huge because he'd never done them before. I set the notebook down. Why are you showing me this? Her eyes were red now. Because his brother said you should know that it mattered. What you did. Richard spent his whole life blaming other people for his problems, but after that contempt charge, something broke in him, or maybe something finally got through. I don't know, she wiped her eyes. I'm not asking you to feel bad. I'm not asking for anything. I just thought you deserved to know that he didn't die the same man who walked into your courtroom. I looked at the notebook for a long moment. Then I looked back at her. Mrs. Cooper, I appreciate you coming here, but you need to understand something. I didn't change your ex-husband. He changed himself. All I did was enforce the law. I know, she said. But sometimes that's enough. She stood up, picked up the notebook, hesitated. Do you want to keep this? I thought about it, about the letters in my desk drawer, about the weight of keeping pieces of people's lives. No, I said. But thank you for showing it to me. She nodded, put the notebook back in her bag. His brother is holding a small memorial this weekend. I don't expect you to come. I just wanted you to know. I understand. She walked to the door. Stop, turn back. For what it's worth, Judge, I think you did the right thing. I hated you for it at the time, blamed you for the divorce, for everything. But Richard needed someone to stop him, and you did." Then she left. I sat there for a while after she was gone. The bailiff cleared his throat. "You okay, Judge?" "Yeah," I said. "I'm fine." But I wasn't thinking about Dannon. I was thinking about all the other people who'd stood in my courtroom over the years. The ones who'd walked out angry. The ones who'd felt the system had failed them. The ones who thought I'd been too harsh or too lenient. I wondered how many of them carried those moments forward. How many let them change something? How many forgot about it the next day? I'll never know. That's the strange thing about this job. You make decisions that alter people's lives, and then they walk out the door and you never see them again. You don't get to know if you helped or hurt, if you were right or wrong. You just have to trust that you did your best with the information you had. I went home that night and told my wife about Lisa's visit. She listened quietly, the way she always does when I need to talk through something heavy. "Do you think you were too hard on him?" she asked when I finished. I thought about it. No. I think I was exactly as hard as I needed to be, even knowing how it ended, especially knowing how it ended. I looked at her. He could have stayed the same. He could have blamed everyone else and died bitter, but he didn't. He made a choice to be different. That wasn't because of me, that was him. She took my hand. "You gave him the push, maybe, but he's the one who decided to walk in a new direction." We sat there in the quiet of our living room, and I thought about Richard Dannon's journal. About him sitting in a cell, finally forced to be still, finally forced to face himself. I didn't enjoy sending him there. I never enjoy the hard calls, but I'd make the same decision today if I had to. Because the law has to mean something. And sometimes the only way to make it mean something is to enforce it, even when it's painful, especially when it's painful. The memorial was on Saturday. I told myself I wasn't going. I had yard work to do, bills to pay, a normal weekend planned. But Saturday morning I woke up and couldn't stop thinking about that notebook, about the entries, about a man who'd spent his last years trying to be different. My wife found me in the kitchen staring at my coffee. "You're going, aren't you?" she said. I looked up. "I shouldn't. That's not what I asked." I set down the coffee. "It wouldn't be appropriate. I was the judge on his case. There are boundaries." She sat down across from me. "You're not going as a judge. You're going as a person who knew him, who played a part in his story." She reached across and touched my hand. "You don't have to stay long. Just pay your respects." An hour later, I was driving across town to a small community center. The parking lot was half full. I sat in my car for 5 minutes debating whether to turn around. Then I got out. Inside there were maybe 30 people, folding chairs arranged in rows, a table at the front with a photo of Dannon, smiling, younger from before everything fell apart. Some flowers, a few people standing in small groups talking quietly. I stayed in the back, didn't approach anyone, just stood there. Lisa saw me. She was talking to an older man who I assumed was Dannon's brother. She excused herself and walked over. "You came," she said. "I won't stay long. You don't have to explain." She glanced back at the room. "There aren't many people here." He'd lost touch with most of his old friends. "The people here are from his work, his brother, a few cousins, that's it." We stood there in silence for a moment. "The man he worked for is here," she said, gesturing to a heavy-set guy in his 60s standing near the front. "He told me Richard was the most reliable employee he ever had. Never late, never cut corners, said he trusted him completely." She paused. "I don't think Richard ever heard that before, that someone trusted him." I watched the man. He was talking to Dannon's brother, nodding seriously. "Judge, can I ask you something?" Lisa said. "Go ahead. Do you regret it, holding him in contempt?" I thought about how to answer that. "No, I regret that it had to happen. But I don't regret doing it." She nodded slowly. "He didn't regret it either. Not at the end. That's what his journal said. He was grateful." A young woman approached us. She looked nervous. "Excuse me, are you Judge?" I nodded. "I'm Sarah. I worked with Richard at the shop." She glanced at Lisa, then back to me. "I just wanted to tell you something. Richard talked about you sometimes. Not a lot, but when he did, he said you were the only person who ever made him accountable. He said he spent his whole life getting away with things, and you were the first person who didn't let him. I didn't know what to say to that. He helped me once," she continued. "I was having trouble with my car payment. I was going to go to one of those predatory loan places. He sat me down and talked me out of it, helped me work out a budget. He said he'd made that mistake before and didn't want to see me do the same." She smiled slightly. "He was a good guy. I thought you should know that." "Thank you," I said. She nodded and walked away. The service started a few minutes later. Dannon's brother spoke. He talked about their childhood, about Richard's sense of humor, about how he'd struggled in his later years but had tried to make things right. He mentioned the fraud case testimony, said Richard had been proud of himself for doing it. Then he said something that made me straighten up. Richard left something behind. Not money, he didn't have much of that. But in his apartment we found envelopes, addressed to people he'd wronged over the years, letters of apology. Some had checks in them, small amounts, whatever he could scrape together to start making restitution. He never sent them. I think he was too afraid, but they were ready, sealed, stamped, just sitting on his desk. The brother held up one of the envelopes. "This one is addressed to Alan Greaves. It says, 'I know this doesn't fix what I did, but it's a start. I'm sorry. There's a check inside for $500. It's not much, but it was everything Richard had in his savings account." The room was silent. I felt something twist in my chest. After the service, people milled around. I stayed in the back preparing to leave, but Dannon's brother saw me and walked over. "You're the judge," he said. "I am." He extended his hand. "Thank you for coming." I shook it. "I'm sorry for your loss. He talked about you, you know, especially in the last couple years." He looked tired. "I visited him in jail after you held him in contempt. He was furious, called you every name in the book. But a few years later, when we'd have dinner, he'd bring you up differently. Said you did what you had to do, said he respected that. He didn't have to respect it." "No, but he did." The brother paused. "Can I give you something?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. My name was written on it in that same shaky handwriting. "We found this with the others. It's addressed to you." I stared at it. "I can't accept this. It's not money. It's just a letter. He wanted you to have it, please." I took it. The envelope was light, just paper inside. "Thank you for what you did," the brother said. "I know it's strange to thank a judge for sending your brother to jail, but it woke him up. And I got to know a different version of him in those last few years. A better version. I'm grateful for that." He walked away before I could respond. I left the community center and sat in my car, looked at the envelope, turned it over in my hands, then I opened it. The letter was dated 2 weeks before he died. "Your Honor, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know if I'll send it, but I needed to write it anyway. I've been thinking a lot about that day in your courtroom, the day you held me in contempt. I've replayed it 1,000 times. I used to replay it with anger. Now I replay it with something else. Understanding, maybe, or acceptance. You saw through me. I'd spent my whole life convincing people I was smarter than I was, better than I was. I'd talk fast, smile big, and people would believe me. Except you. You looked at me and saw exactly what I was. A man who thought rules were for everyone else. When you sent me to jail, I thought my life was over. And in a way, it was. The life I'd built on lies and shortcuts ended that day, but something else started. It took me a long time to see it. Years, actually. But sitting here now, working an honest job, living in a small apartment, finally at peace with myself, I can see it clearly. You gave me a gift, not a pleasant one. Not one I wanted, but a gift nonetheless. You forced me to stop running. You made me sit with who I'd become. And in that stillness, I finally had to decide who I wanted to be. I chose to be different. It hasn't been easy. I've made mistakes. I've fallen back into old patterns. But every time I do, I remember sitting in that cell, and I remember your voice telling me that the power to comply was in my hands. That phrase stuck with me. The power was in my hands. It always had been. I'd just been too much of a coward to use it. I don't expect forgiveness. Not from Alan Greaves. Not from my ex-wife, not from anyone, but I wanted you to know that what you did mattered. You showed me that accountability isn't punishment, it's freedom. Freedom from the lies, from the running, from pretending to be something I wasn't. I'm not the same man who walked into your courtroom. I hope that counts for something. Thank you. Richard Dannon. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. I sat there in the parking lot for a long time, watching people leave the memorial, watching them hug each other, get in their cars, drive away. Then I drove home. My wife was in the garden when I got there. She looked up as I walked across the lawn. How was it? Quiet, small, sad. Are you okay? I handed her the letter. She read it while I stood there, hands in my pockets, looking at the trees in our backyard. When she finished, she folded it and gave it back. That's quite a thing to carry. Yeah. Do you feel differently about what you did? I thought about it. About Dannon in that courtroom smirking. About Greaves losing everything. About a man who spent his last years trying to rebuild himself from nothing. No, I said. I'd still do it. I had to, but I'm glad he found his way. She took my hand. We stood there in the garden, not saying anything. That night I put the letter in my desk drawer with the others. 3 letters now. 3 lives that intersected with mine in that courtroom. I don't look at them often, but I know they're there. Monday morning I was back on the bench. First case was a sentencing. Young man who'd violated probation. His attorney argued for another chance. The prosecutor wanted jail time. I listened to both sides, looked at the defendant. He was 23, scared, trying not to show it. Do you understand why you're here? I asked him. Yes, Your Honor. Do you understand that the court gave you an opportunity and you chose not to take it seriously? He nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Then here's what's going to happen. I'm going to give you one more chance. 30 days in county jail, followed by extended probation with strict conditions. If you violate again, you'll serve the remainder of your original sentence. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Don't thank me. Prove you deserve it. He was let out. The prosecutor looked frustrated. The defense attorney looked relieved. And I moved on to the next case, because that's what you do. You make the call. You live with it. And you trust that somewhere down the line it might mean something to someone. I thought about Richard Dannon, about the man he was and the man he became. I didn't save him. I just held up a mirror. What he did with his reflection was up to him. And in the end, that's all any of us can do. Make our choices, face our consequences, and decide who we want to be on the other side. The gavel feels heavier some days than others. But I pick it up anyway because someone has to.